Good day. I'm Dr. M. Peter Arun. Today, I'll be speaking on DDP-MAS. DDP-MAS stands for Design, Development, Production of Military Air Systems and Airborne Stores. This is a procedural document and a regulatory document that brings out all the necessary technical requirements that needs to be met for airworthiness and certification of military air systems and airborne stores in India. For today's talk, let's take a look at an introduction to airworthiness and certification and who does airworthiness in the global scenario, and this DDP-MAS, the revised DDP-MAS which was issued in the year 2021, what was its evolution and the drivers for it, and we take a look at the framework procedures and the regulations of the DDP-MAS, some of the broad benefits envisaged for all stakeholders, and let's introduce you to some of the new concepts brought in this document before we conclude. Airworthiness and certification is a term that is synonymously used with military aviation platforms and airborne stores. So what does it actually mean? Airworthiness, in simple terms, is fitness to fly. A more elaborate definition is airworthiness is a continued capability of the aircraft or a system to perform satisfactorily and fulfill the mission requirements throughout the specified life in the prevailing environments with acceptable levels of safety and reliability. The important word here is safety, and certification is nothing but the procedure that ascertains that the aircraft that has so produced is indeed acceptable from safety point of view for the design intent for which it has been designed for the envelopes for which it has been designed for its specified life. Airworthiness coverage spans the entire life cycle of the aircraft. It is from the conception to the retirement of the aircraft. Certification done during the development phase at every phase of development till the aircraft is safely delivered amounts to concurrent certification coverage. And in service, the aircraft would undergo upgrades for obsolescence management, modifications to enhance its capability, life extension, repairs, and the certification at this phase is called the continued airworthiness coverage. So who does airworthiness at the global scenario? So every military aircraft producing nation in the world has a set defined certification approach and a certification methodology in place done by organizations and departments that are empowered to do it. Listed here are few countries and the departments and the organizations who are empowered to undertake airworthiness and certification for their military air systems and airborne stores. Essentially, there are three approaches. If the designer does the certification, so to speak, a self-certification based on a cell or an airworthiness group within his own department, then we call it first-party certification. If the user who accepts the aircraft has got the necessary wherewithal and the test facility to undertake certification, then it's called the second-party certification. But instead, if there is a totally new independent airworthiness authority or an organization who's empowered to do the certification and who's neutral, we call it the third-party certification. In India, it's the third-party certification undertaken by the Ministry of Defense. It is done by two organizations, Center for Military Airworthiness and Certification, CEMILAC, for Design Assurance, and Directorate General of Aeronautical Quality Assurance, DGAQA, for Quality Assurance. CEMILAC comes under DRDO, under Secretary DDR&D and Chairman DRDO. DGAQA comes under Secretary Defense Production. When we say ensuring airworthiness all through the life cycle of the air system, what it essentially boils down to three phases of certification. The product should be airworthy by design, wherein it is evaluated for its design adequacy and test adequacy, and this is done by CEMILAC. And then the product should be airworthy by manufacture and quality, which means the approved standard of preparation stemming from the design evaluation with the quality assurance in place is undertaken by DGAQA, and then the aircraft should be airworthy by maintenance, which means at every given point of time, the aircraft should be ready to fly, fit to do its intended purpose by ensuring proper maintenance, servicing, in place based on the approved procedure, and this is undertaken by the user services. All these activities, the technical requirements, are captured and regulated through this document, the design, development, production of military air systems and airborne stores. This is the procedural and the regulatory document that regulates military airworthiness in India during design, development, manufacture of products and for Indian military application. This document was first released in the year 1975. It was inspired from the UK MOD Def Stand 05123. Some of our erstwhile aircraft like the Ajit, HPT-32, Ajit Trainer and Kiran have greatly benefited from the processes and procedures brought out in this document. 2.5 decades later, the growth in military aviation technology manifested in newer generations of aircraft, the fighter aircraft, the naval aircraft, these trainer aircraft, the transport aircraft, the UAVs and different class of helicopters, and each of these requirements had to be updated in the document, and hence the second version of DDP MAS 2002 was released in the year 2002, incorporating all the necessary upgrades that were needed at that point of time. 2 decades later, there has been an unprecedented growth in military aviation technologies in the areas of unmanned aircraft systems, air-launched missiles and weapons, aero engines, military transport aircraft, fifth generation fighter aircraft, AEW&C, AWACS, advanced materials and advanced payloads and sensors, and each of this domain requiring a very unique treatment for the requirements for military airworthiness. So with this set in place, it was very clear what should be the drivers for the new DDP MAS. The driving factors for the new DDP MAS should be in line with the Indian government policies like the Atmanirbhar Bharat, Make to India policies, and it should be in line with the international standards, and it should be harmonized to the international standards so that it facilitates defense cooperation and exports and also mutual recognition. It should be contemporary and simplify all processes, and at the same time it should be practical and easily implementable. With this in place, the existing DDP MAS 2002 was restructured into a structured, coherent and a hierarchical manner with three-tier approach, the first being the framework, which outlines the policy, and it brings out the necessary aspects of airworthiness. It defines the roles and responsibilities of all the stakeholders, and it also empowers the stakeholders to carry out the necessary duties. The second tier is the regulation document, and these are procedural aspects and also the technical requirements towards meeting the airworthiness of a particular product. And the third is the manual layer, which consists of forms, templates and airworthiness directives, which enables the user to follow the manuals and then implement the requirements as brought out in the regulations to process for all the necessary approvals, clearances from CEMILAC and DGAQA. So let us look at what the framework document contains. The DDP MAS framework and procedure document consists of two parts. The first part serves as an introduction to Indian military airworthiness and framework, and the second part contains the policy for the design, development, production and certification of air systems and airborne stores. The first part is further divided into 3 chapters. The chapter 1, namely Introduction to Indian Military Airworthiness, chapter 2, which is the Indian Military Airworthiness Framework, and chapter 3 for military acquisition models. This chapter is aimed at introducing the speaker to the Indian Military Airworthiness Framework and sets the tone for what's to come in part 2, which is the policy of DDP MAS. The policy part is divided into 12 chapters. The policy requirements for ab initio development, for license production and bought out aircraft are brought out in chapter 1, 2 and 3. Then the requirements at continued airworthiness and continuing airworthiness is brought out in chapter 4. Policy level requirements of flight testing brought out in chapter 5, and there are chapters that have been introduced newly for the first time in DDP Mass, which are chapter 6 to chapter 11, which are unmanned aircraft systems, air-launched missiles, research air systems, civil certified military aircraft, export of indigenous air systems, and organization approval, and chapter 12, which talks of indigenous substitution. This slide is color coded. The blue ones are to indicate what was already existing in the earlier DDP Mass, but with an added updation that is required to make it contemporary, and the new chapters which have been included are indicated in black. If we go to the second tier, which is the regulations, it is called the IMTAR 21, Indian Military Technical Airworthiness Requirements 21. And these are basically regulations which are put into 19 subparts. Each subpart contains all the applicable requirements within the scope of subpart title, and each regulation covers the technical airworthiness requirement for the air system and the airborne stores. If we take a deeper look at each of the subpart, it is further divided as the rationale, which says what should be the basis for this regulation. It lists down the contents of all the regulations that are needed within that subpart title. It lists down the regulations which are uniquely numbered, and they act as the regulatory article which must be followed towards airworthiness, and acceptable means of compliance, which are non-exclusive means of demonstrating the compliance of technical airworthiness. And if there are alternate means, those are also listed to help the designers, and guidance material is also listed which facilitates in meeting the acceptable means of compliance and thereby helping the designers to meet the regulations. Taking a closer look of the subpart A is a general procedure, and the requirements for ab initio development of air systems, aircraft, UAS, air launch missiles and engines are brought out in subpart B, and the ones for airborne stores are brought out in subpart C, along with requirements for materials and software. The aircraft do undergo modifications. The air systems do undergo modifications. The requirements are brought out in subpart D-E. Requirements for production is brought out in subpart F, and the new inclusion of organization approval for design, production and maintenance is brought out in subpart G. Certificates of airworthiness in subpart H, research air systems in I, indigenous substitution K, continued airworthiness requirements in subpart L. Air systems and airborne stores do undergo repair in service. The requirements are brought out in subpart M. The requirements for bought out air systems, flight testing brought out in subpart N and P respectively. Identification of LRUs, which are very critical for defining the SOP of the aircraft, are brought out in subpart Q. Civil certified military aircraft, customer furnished equipment and customer specified equipments are brought out in subpart R and S. Tools, rigs, testers, equipments are brought out in subpart T. And finally, a important subpart U that has been brought out is the mutual recognition, which enables exports and enables defense global cooperation. Let us look some of the processes and procedures brought out in this requirements regulation document in the form of schematics. For project initiation, it all starts with the draft requirements called the draft ASR. Based on the feasibility study, it is made precise as a precise staff requirements, and based on this, documentation is done by the development agency and an approval is taken from the MOD, and then the design and development phase starts, wherein all the stakeholders, the designers, the certification agencies and the user services are involved during the development, and the successful development leads to a type documentation, certificate and approval by CEMILAC, and finally it enters into the production phase. For ab initio development, which is the most critical part of the entire processes, involves the design evaluation and the test adequacy. The design is evaluated through series of reviews defined by the PDRs and the CDRs, and then there is the testing that happens. The outcome of the testing goes into the design, and the whole iteration process continues till the design is brought to a level of maturity, and then the product is realized. The realized product prototype is flight tested, and the outcome of the flight testing feeds back into the design iteratively to improvise the design. And once the flight testing is completed, based on the analysis, the certification is issued, and finally the aircraft is issued with the military type certificate, or a product is given a type approval along with the RSD is released to the service. Requirements for ab initio flight testing are adequately captured in this document. Flight testing is an important phase of development because an unproven platform or an unproven LRU or an unproven modification is tested for the first time. Therefore, a very careful, cautious, progressive clearances with staircase approach is adopted during flight testing, starting with the flight test requirements, the flight test plan, the flight test schedule, and the FCN, or the flight clearance certificate, that is issued for a prescribed envelopes. This flight testing is completed when all the requirements of flight testing are demonstrated and complied with. Production is a phase which starts when the development is complete, and the starting point of production is freezing the drawings and the equipment standard of preparation. During production, there could be concessions, there could be deviations, and there are modifications and alterations that are coming in, and adequate provisions are in place in this document to address each of the path that the production may follow. And finally, necessary requirements for testing of the produced item is also in place in this document, both for ground and for flight testing. And once all these activities towards production is completed, then the aircraft is delivered and inducted into the services. This is the most important phase because this is the phase where a product that is airworthy by design, which is on paper, is translated to a product that is airworthy by manufacture, quality, and production. During the life cycle of the aircraft, it may be required that a LRU be replaced with an indigenous one. This is called the indigenous substitution. Adequate provisions are in place to address the development of indigenous products. Firstly, defining them critical and non-critical, and depending on its criticality classification, the provisions are in place to take the product to its fruitful completion towards successful indigenization of the products. Aircraft in service can undergo upgrades and modifications. The requirements for continued airworthiness coverage is well brought out in this document. It starts with design evaluation and testing, both ground and flight. Flight trial evaluation reports are studied. Upon satisfactory completion, the whole modifications or the upgrades are ratified for fleet through the local modification committee, otherwise called the LMC. Let us look at some of the broad benefits envisaged for various stakeholders. Firstly, the user services. The user services are involved during the concurrent design and development activities. For research air systems and airborne stores, the user services have delegated roles of the airworthiness authorities, and for non-critical items being developed by BRDs and its equivalent organizations within the services, there are a lot more flexibility and freedom to the acceptance of non-critical items. And for critical airborne equipments, the user services can source them from multiple vendors through the IMA-TSO scheme. For the flight test agencies, the flight test plans and the flight test schedules are completely in the domain of the flight test agencies, and there is a lot more freedom when it comes to the block clearance concepts, which are well elaborated and captured at the policy level, and a lot more privileges are envisaged for the flight test agencies of the main contractor through the organization approval schemes. For research and development production organization, the whole document is brought out in a process-dependent approach stemming from the principles of system engineering. There are enhanced role for the internal quality assurance department, especially in the areas of unmanned air systems and air-launched missiles. There is gradual self-certification through organization approval schemes, and several provisions for novel and unique R&D initiatives have been enabled in this document. For private industries, the entire document is aligned with the defense acquisition procedures and the defense procurement manuals, and the certification coverage can be given even when there is no firm orders or expression of interest through the IMA-TSO and the LOTA schemes of the DDP MAS. It is a process-dependent approach, and enhanced delegation is envisaged, leading to self-certification through organizational approval schemes. Enhanced role for internal quality assurance department of the private industries in the area of unmanned air systems, and provisions for novel and unique R&D initiatives have been enabled, and through mutual recognition with foreign certification agencies, facilitation of exports of the products of private industries have also been enabled. Let us look at some of the new concepts introduced. This is the Indian Military Aviation Technical Standard Order IMA-TSO scheme. This is based on the US FAA TSO scheme, wherein based on the technical specifications released by CEMILAC in the form of technical standard order, an industry who has a core competency in a particular domain can develop products even without a firm expression of interest from the MOD, and CEMILAC and DGAQA will give the certification coverage, and these products can be exported or given to user services as and when required if they meet the requirements of the platform. The letter of technical approval LOTA scheme. Certain equipments that do not follow the type approval route and certain equipments that do not follow the IMA TSO route but are generic in nature that could be used across systems can still be proposed by the industry, and certification coverage will be accorded by the certification agencies, and these products can be utilized for exports through the letter of technical approval from CEMILAC. This document is process dependent. There are clear demarcations of roles of CEMILAC and DGAQA at various phases of product development. Detailed regulations are given to help remove ambiguities in application, and a separate acceptable means of compliance and guidance material are also brought out to help the designers to process for the airworthiness and certification. A manual layer has been introduced which will be contemporary. It will be built up dynamically, which will enable the developers to use them towards meeting the requirements, and in order to save time, CEMILAC is also looking at process automation by e-certification portal to be introduced in days to come. The organization approval scheme has been brought in this document, and this is basically to give enhanced delegation to industries, and they are under three categories: the design organization approval scheme, the production organization schemes, and the maintenance organization approval scheme. These are given at two levels, the air system and the airborne stores level, and based on the approval, the industries and the organizations can have enhanced delegations in the form of privileges to undertake certain D&D and QA activities, and this is a step towards a gradual self-certification in certain areas to come. A new chapter on exports of air systems and airborne stores has been introduced. This is to facilitate our Indian industries to develop products which are certified in the country and that could be exported to foreign countries. A separate chapter for research air systems and airborne stores has been included. This is to enable novel and unique R&D initiatives. Industries can pursue innovations and research even without a firm order from the user services with delegated roles. With all this in place, we have now come to the conclusion of this talk. The new DDP MAS is brought out in a three-tier layered and structured approach which facilitates ease of comprehension and implementation. It is in line with the international approach wherein it facilitates global defense cooperation, it facilitates airworthiness mutual recognition. It is also in line with the government defense policies in design, manufacture and exports. It is process dependent, and enhanced delegation through organization approval schemes have been adequately brought out in this